Okay, next we can talk about the commandos. Their job, as I've said before, was to knock out the coastal battery guns on either side of the main beaches. They were also hopefully going to capture some prisoners that could be taken back for interrogation. A man named Lord Lovat was one of the creators of the commandos. Now the word commando is a Boer word. The soldiers, the Dutch soldiers that fought against the British and Canadians in South Africa used that word. The British adopted the word commando to use with their Royal Marine Special Forces. This was one of the first times that a combined Special Forces operation occurred in the Second World War, and it was, in fact, at least a partial success. I find this photograph interesting. You can see that some of the soldiers coming back are in very bad shape. Interesting, I like the soldier in the front. He's picked up a German souvenir hat and he's wearing that on his way home. Okay, next we can talk about the air support element of this operation. It's noteworthy that this was the largest air support operation to date in the Second World War. The Royal Air Force and the Royal Canadian Air Force, most of the planes were RAF, but there were some Canadians. They were assigned to provide bomber support for the ground troops. The idea here is that they would be able to bomb targets ahead of the soldiers, maybe take out some machine guns or things of that nature. And the fighters, of course, would provide cover over top of the beaches so that if German aircraft tried to attack the soldiers, they would be able to be taken care of. What's really interesting for me is the idea that the Royal Air Force had hoped to put a great number of planes in the air, and because they knew the Germans didn't have as many planes, they hoped to win a battle of attrition. And this kind of harkens back to the strategic philosophy that planners used in the First World War, and we saw how disastrous these wars of battles of attrition, could be. We'll just look briefly at some of the aircraft. Many of the British planes at the beginning of the Second World War were pretty second-rate affairs. The Bristol Blenheim was a medium bomber that was pretty much a coffin for its crew. Very slow, very poorly armed, and so a really easy target for a German fighter. As the Americans gave more and more support to the Allies, the British, with their Lend-Lease program, we can see that they had access to some American aircraft. The Boston bomber was a huge improvement over the Blenheim bomber. From our study of the Battle of Britain, you know about the Hawker Hurricane. This was the older of the two main British fighters, and it was used extensively in the Battle of Britain, but by the middle of the war, the Hurricane is being phased out in favor of the Spitfire. Now, the Supermarine Spitfire was constantly being improved throughout the war. I think there were about 10 different versions. Some of the planes that fought at Dieppe were Mark 9 Spitfires, much faster than the Mark 1s and the Mark 2s. And then a newer plane yet is the Hawker Typhoon. These were used in D-Day as tank busters. They would put rockets under the wings. Now, the fastest fighter of the war was the American P-51 Mustang. There were 4 squadrons of Mustangs at Dieppe. They were used as reconnaissance airplanes. The Mark I Mustang that flew in 1942 was nowhere near as fast as the Mustangs that were flying by the end of the war. Now, what did they have to fight against? Well, the Focke-Wulf, the FW-190, was in service by this time. The Messerschmitt Bf-109 was the fighter that fought in the Battle of Britain, but the Focke-Wulf was a superior plane. And then as far as dropping bombs on the soldiers on the beach, they have the Dornier 217. The Germans never had a big 4-engine, or at least they didn't produce many big 4-engine bombers. Most of their bombers were medium bombers with only 2 engines. Some numbers for you. Ultimately, the Allies were able to shoot down 48 German planes. The Germans were able to shoot down 106 Allied planes. You can see that at least when it comes to the number of planes that were available, the British had far more planes than the Germans. Of course, the Germans were closer to the target than the British were. But when we look at the numbers, we can't necessarily be fooled, because although the Germans shot down twice as many planes as the British, if the British have more planes overall, those lost German planes could in fact be a more significant loss to the Germans than the 106 planes to the Allies. Nevertheless, for the British to lose 106 planes in one day is the worst day of loss in the RAF for the Second World War. Okay, some other numbers. Well, there were 6,000 men involved in the raid, and over half of those were either killed, wounded, or captured. So when it comes to measuring Dieppe, it is a very expensive day in the Canadian War record. This is an excellent shot from one of the cliffs looking down at the beach, and you can see that the German soldiers firing from this position had an absolute clear view of every single soldier that was landing on the beach. If you understand what an arc of fire is and how interlocking arcs of fire can create killing zones, you could understand that the Germans had the perfect defensive position here. So the large objects on the beach are the landing craft, and the smaller objects are the tanks. This is a Churchill tank used at Dieppe, and it was the new British tank for this part of the war. Okay, this picture shows a scout car in the foreground, and you can see again it's driven itself right down to the hull of the vehicle. So the number of prisoners were staggering, almost 1,900 prisoners. They were forced to walk off the beach with whatever they had. There's one interesting story where a French woman, recognizing that the soldiers obviously wouldn't have anything to eat or drink since they landed on the beach first thing in the morning, picked up some tomatoes from a basket and started throwing tomatoes at the soldiers. Now the German guards laughed because she thought it was a French woman pelting these soldiers with tomatoes, but of course what she was really doing was throwing tomatoes to the soldiers, and they were greedily eating them down. So here's a shot of some survivors returning. The Victoria Cross is the highest medal for valor given to the Commonwealth soldiers, and there were 2 Victoria Crosses awarded after the Battle of Dieppe, or the Dieppe raid. One went to Lieutenant Colonel Cecil Merritt. He started the war as a Seaforth Highlander, but he was seconded to the South Saskatchewan Regiment as their commanding officer, and he won the Victoria Cross for his efforts to rally his soldiers who were pinned down on the seawall, and he was taken into captivity. The second Victoria Cross was given to Captain John Foote, and he was the Padre for the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry, one of the 2 regiments that lost the most men in this day, and he spent the day exposing himself to fire, taking wounded and trying to bring them either to safety behind the seawall or to help them get evacuated from the beach. And at the end of the day, when he had a chance to leave on a landing craft, he chose to stay with the men. They chose one of the regiments who was at the Dieppe raid in 1942 to liberate the town of Dieppe in 1944 after D-Day.